The appointed time and hour for the convening of the Senate Ethics Committee. It's March the 15th. I note the presence of a quorum, and if you'll join me for a moment, we'll have an invocation. Father, we're grateful for challenges, but we're most grateful for your patience and your wisdom. Help us to do what is right in your sight and in the best interests of the people of Georgia. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, we have a meeting today to address two House bills, House Bill 333 and House Bill 531. We're going to deal with House Bill 333 initially, and I'd like to ask the Chairman of House Judiciary, Chairman Efstration, to join us. I have a question from the Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, prior to the Honorable Chuck Efstration speaking to the committee, could I have a point of personal privilege?
Certainly.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce you. I have a young lady from my district here in the back of the room there. Not the very back. Wait a minute. You're looking like you don't know what I'm talking about. Stand up.
She's hiding behind her.
I just want to welcome all constituents of the 49th district.
The 49th, and I would like to welcome all constituents who are here today to address the issues of both House Bill 333 and House Bill 531. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Look forward to hearing from a number of you as we proceed. Chairman, point of order.
Did you need a motion to adopt the substitute?
We were going to discuss the version correct, Mr. Whip.
Okay.
We have in your folders the original bill, HB 333, and I understand there is a substitute. Is that not true, Mr. Chairman? All right, I'll need a motion from a member to consider the substitute.
Motion.
I have a motion, a second. Without objection.
Can we read the LC number to make
LC
sure
number is 413111S. Is that correct?
Yep.
So we're considering House Bill 333 LC 413111S. No objection. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you will, present your legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll begin by noting I just left the House Judiciary Committee where we passed out about 8 Senate bills today. So
we thank you for that.
Yes,
thank
sir.
You, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Just wanted to note that. No, thank you. It's an honor to be before you today. This substitute to House Bill 333 is legislation to address campaign finance reform in the state of Georgia. This legislation was brought by the State Ethics Commission, really dealing with several issues that have been noted in our existing ethics laws and ensuring that we have updates in some circumstances based upon cases that are specifically cited, other areas where we have cleanup that's clearly needed in the code. And what I'll do is just go through section by section because it is an omnibus bill. So section 2 is the title of the commission. The title of the act, which is just updated to accurately reflect the name of the commission. Section 3 provides some definitions, Mr. Chairman. So loan, although used in the code section, was not specifically defined, and so we define it. It also makes clear the officers that are referenced. I can provide further explanation, but provides a specific statewide officers and then a catch-all in B for all other state constitutional officers. And then lines 38 to 40 are the staff attorney definition, which we'll get into in a moment. But that's an attorney who works for the commission who will be authorized to bring complaints. Section 4 deals with ensuring that that the commission is under the state accounting office, which was done by executive order in other areas previously, but to ensure that the commission's not responsible for or attached administratively to an agency that it oversees, the Secretary of State would change that to the State Accounting Office. As far as Section 5, Mr. Chairman, what we're doing is providing in that a staff attorney would be able to, we're making explicit that a staff attorney would be able to pursue complaints that are brought before the commission. Although I understand that can currently occur, this makes it explicitly clear that a written complaint could be brought by the commission, which makes sense because often the commission itself may have the greatest knowledge of the alleged campaign finance violation, and they would need to bring a complaint on their behalf. And I should say, here with me today is David Amati, who's the director of the State Ethics Commission. He's seated over here, and he's ready to jump up and correct me if anything I say isn't right. But he is a wealth of knowledge on these issues. The Section 6 deals with an issue that, which I would characterize as cleanup language. If you'll note here the language that's to be struck, the question has been whether probable cause must be determined before the commission could actually initiate its own action, and that has turned into kind of a circular question as to whether or not issues can be brought or preceded by the commission. And so we're making that clear by removing it. As far as Section 7 deals with the period within which a complaint may be brought. You might consider this as a statute of limitations. What we're doing is that an action may be brought for a candidate with a term of 2 years in office within 3 years of the wrongful act or omission. You'll see that in lines 123, 124. We're dealing with two issues here. The first is specifying the period within which the complaint may be brought. And also, we're dealing with when the date that is to be from. In other words, is it the failure to file the report, or was it the acceptance of the impermissible contribution? So we make it clear that when the clock starts and how long the clock will run. And for elected officials with a term of 4 years, that would be 5 years from the wrongful act or omission. Section 8 deals with record-keeping requirements. So a common question is how long records are to be kept, and this will make it explicitly clear. If you're a candidate for an office with a term of 2 years, records must be kept for 3 years from the date of the contribution or expenditure. If you're a candidate for an office with a term of 4 years, it would be for a 5-year period. If you're a candidate for an office with a term of 6 years, it would be for a 7-year period. And in each, the objective is to provide 1 year of additional time within which a complaint could be brought, viewing any potential violations that might have occurred over a similar period of time, over that term of office or a period within which re-election would be sought. All right. Section 9, first of all, deals with some what I characterize as cleanup language. Contribution is just the incorrect word in line 179, so we've updated that to donation, which it should be. And then lines 199 to 207 deal with permissible uses of campaign contributions. So campaign funds may not be, this makes it explicit, may not be gifted, loaned, or invested with the candidate, a member of the candidate's family, a business in which the candidate has a controlling interest, or an ownership interest, the candidate's trust or a trust of the member of the candidate's family, or a nonprofit organization in which the candidate or a member of the candidate's family is on the payroll or has a controlling interest. In other words, although we can gift our campaign funds to say a nonprofit organization that we support, that's fine. That's unchanged in this bill unless you are on the candidate or a member of the candidate's family is on the payroll of that nonprofit organization or has a controlling interest. That's to ensure that there isn't an end around to allow the candidate to receive the campaign funds personally. All right, Section 10 deals with a real technicality in the law that we've had. So increases in contribution limits are determined by cycles. And what has actually occurred is different candidates, sometimes even running for the same office, can face a different number of cycles, say depending on a runoff or primaries that are required for their positions. And based upon that, theoretically, there is not uniformity in even the amounts, the contribution limits for candidates within the same office. So what this does is effectively index that to gubernatorial cycles. So this would provide when the contribution limits will be raised in a standard manner, so it would apply to all candidates. Section 11 deals with when a candidate may begin spending funds for a subsequent election cycle. So as we all may know, funds can be collected for a subsequent cycle prior to reaching that cycle. A candidate can receive the max amount for a primary and the general before the primary. The question is, what if funds are received for say the runoff before the primary? When may those funds begin to be spent for the primary runoff? And what this makes clear is you may only begin spending those funds after you have reached the runoff in that example. Or you may only begin spending those funds after you've reached the subsequent cycle. That's just to ensure that there's clarity that funds are only to be spent when you're actually in that relevant election. And there were some questions about this in the House. This does nothing to change the fact that funds unused from a previous cycle may be retained. That's unchanged. All right, Section 12. Deals with something that specifically has impacted our judges. So currently, if you serve on a state board, you're required to file a financial affidavit. And our Superior Court judges, as I understand it, by virtue of their office alone, are automatically members of the Superior Court Judge Council. And there's been some question as to whether or not they're required to file affidavits as members of that council. They are already providing disclosures as part of their job as a Superior Court judge to, I believe it's the Supreme Court. So this just makes clear that they do not have to file the additional affidavit with the State Ethics Commission just by virtue of being a member, automatically being a member of that council in their position as a judge. The latter half of that section deals with candidates for, and I'll also speak more broadly about this, candidates for, as part of this bill, who are challengers to an incumbent position, potentially at the county level currently, do not have to file affidavits of their personal financial disclosure. This bill will ensure, so an example would be on a county level, if an incumbent is running for re-election, the incumbent must file the personal financial disclosure. A challenger, however, due to just a glitch in the law, does not have to file that personal financial disclosure. So that's now being addressed in this bill. Also, if you're a candidate for a statewide office, you will have to provide a financial disclosure for 5 years. Section 13 of the bill provides that thank you. That's just a grammatical update, an issue there. This bill passed the State House unanimously, was vetted in the House Judiciary Committee, and the bill that we brought before you today is one that we believe helps to instill public confidence in elected government, ensure that our campaign finance laws are updated depending on questions that have been received and feedback that has been given, in addition to observations made by the Ethics Commission. Would appreciate your favorable consideration. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, would you go to page 9 for me, please?
Yes, sir.
206 is where I am. So my wife works for an international nonprofit that has clubs all over the state. I can't contribute to any of the clubs?
So the way it's written here, that's correct. You could not contribute to the nonprofit organization in which she is on the payroll, as it's written here. And the issue here is, I'm very sensitive to this, and I understand there are folks who may want to contribute to a church where, say, a family members employed. And as I understand it, family member is only a spouse, but not children. Is that correct? Oh, spouse and dependent children, excuse me. So, but that is correct. And I think the concern here was that if we didn't explicitly exclude family members, there may be some overlap that would occur that would be of concern.
Okay, I'm going to have you explain to her why I can't contribute to them anymore.
Mr. Leader, I am certainly interested in any feedback that you might have to give, but I think that the objective here is clear, that we just want to make sure that in use of those campaign funds that there not be any overlap between the candidate's interests and some what might otherwise be perceived as some sort of use that is contrary to the law. And what's important is that we just have some bright lines in place so everybody knows what the rules are. Once you know what the rules are, you can follow them, and any other member would be able to donate to the charity.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the majority whip.
Thank you, Chairman. Section 11, you went over that pretty quick, and I was trying to read it. Can you tell me what the current law is on the runoffs if there's not a runoff? If you accept a contribution and there's not a runoff, how do you utilize that money? It starts on line 232 and runs through 259, but I don't think it's addressed in this bill, but it's in current law. I was just trying to remember what current law was on that.
So my understanding is that current law isn't explicit as to that those funds would need to be returned. The federal law certainly requires that, but there is a bit of ambiguity as to that currently.
Okay. So you think that if you accept a contribution for a runoff, there's not a runoff, then you should return that money?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Other questions? Mr. Chairman, looking at section 7, I'm sorry.
I think that's a very interesting line of conversation that the sponsor and the majority whip are having. Can you expound on that in any way? Anything you'd like to add? Because I think there's a lot of speculation and concern around the receipt of donations for races that don't happen.
So my understanding, I'm not a campaign finance expert, and we have one here with us who can fill in the blanks here, but my understanding is that the law does not explicitly prohibit right now receiving contributions for a cycle you can receive contributions for a cycle which may not ultimately occur, but the law does not require that money received be returned. And the example would be you could receive money for, say, the primary and a primary runoff, the limits on both, and then say you don't have a primary runoff, those funds could arguably be, or it's being argued that they could be retained. And I think that, and I support that those funds should be returned. That cycle didn't occur, and those funds need to be returned, and we need to make it explicit in Georgia law that that's a requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Other questions for the author? Mr. Chairman, if you look back at section 7, I just want a quick clarification. Line 119 indicates that alleging a violation shall commence within 3 years after the date on which the violation or wrongful action or omission occurred. That would be for terms of less than 4 years, is that correct?
Yes, sir. It's a term of 2 years, and the way it's written this way is it also captures campaigns on ballot referendum, constitutional amendments, other non-term specific offices.
Thank you. I appreciate clarification. Other questions for the author? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're happy to take public input. Anyone who would like to speak to this issue?
Chairman Burns, is it true we're just having a hearing on this today?
That is correct.
Okay,
Since we
thank you.
received the substitute at a late date, we're going to take certainly the input from the author, questions from the committee. We'll accept input from the public, and I have none on this issue. So what we will do is table this at this time, bring it back tomorrow. We have a meeting of the Ethics Commission, the Ethics Committee tomorrow afternoon, and we will address this issue at the time. I've asked Senator Strickland if he would be the sponsor of this legislation in the Senate, and I'd ask him to bring this back to the committee tomorrow for consideration. That's acceptable to the committee? Hearing, question from the minority leader. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, do you need a motion to table?
Part of parliamentary requirement would suggest that might be appropriate. Are you comfortable with that?
That's what I thought.
Do you make a motion? I have a
make a
second.
motion.
Motion and a second. Those agreed to tabling this until tomorrow's meeting for consideration tomorrow for action, indicate with the uplifted hand. Thank you very much. We will move to our second agenda item. Let's see. I need to make sure that Chairman Fleming, Barry Fleming, can join us. We may be running just a tad ahead of schedule. That's a good thing. If we could just stand at ease for maybe 10 minutes, I'll get Chairman Fleming to join us so that he can present HB 531. We'll be happy to begin discussions for House Bill 531. We're going to check the corridors and encourage our members to join us. The corridors, not the coroners. No, no. All right. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We're now ready to consider House Bill 531. This will be a hearing only as well. It's a substantial piece of legislation that the House Special Committee on Election Integrity has been working on for weeks and months. We're happy to welcome Chairman Barry Fleming with us, and I'll ask Chairman Fleming if he will walk the committee through his legislation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I appreciate y'all letting me come speak with you today about House Bill 531. It's designed to bring back the confidence of our voters into our election system. The main component of that effort is by enhancing enacting several revisions which will make the administration of elections easier for our local elected official. The bill addresses several areas. It addresses absentee voting.
Mr. Chairman, just for point of clarification, I want to make sure everyone understands we're dealing with House Bill 531. There is no substitute. It is LC. Actually, there is an S number, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
It is LC 280264S. This is a House substitute. This is not a Senate substitute. Is that clear? So we're dealing with the base bill that was provided to the Senate by the House. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Please continue.
Mr. Chairman and members, the bill addresses several different areas. Absentee voting, improvements to in-person voting. It addresses the testing of voting equipment and prepares for better auditing of election results. It improves aspects of the timing of our elections process, and it addresses the roles of and the actions of election officials. First of all, regarding absentee voting, it replaces the controversial signature matching with driver's license and other types of identification. It makes clear what is and what is not an official absentee ballot application, including the disclaimer that this is not a ballot on any application form that somebody would send out to one of our voters. How many stories did y'all hear, like we probably did, that somebody claims that they got multiple absentee absentee ballots in the mail, when really they probably received multiple absentee ballot applications. It also sets the start and the end dates for absentee ballot applications. We had a testimony in our hearing on the House side. The election director of Harbison County came in, and she said under current Georgia law, you have until the Friday before the Tuesday election to actually apply for an absentee ballot. And I think the way she described it, she either said it or she held up her hand and she said you have about this much chance of getting your absentee ballot and voting in time under current Georgia law. So what House Bill 531 does, it actually changes it to the one Friday before that. So there is actually time to apply under Georgia law and get it back, whereas current law actually encourages you to do something, or could encourage you to do something that will result in your not being able to vote. It also deals with the early scanning of absentee ballots. We all know from what we saw after our last election, the image of votes being counted at 2, 3, or 4 in the morning or days later was not good for voter confidence. And I said on the House side that your mama taught you that don't nothing good happen after midnight. Anything we can do to encourage our voting to get done the night of the election will help the confidence of people in our election system. And that is what the going ahead and codifying the early scanning of absentee ballots should do. Regarding improvements to in-person voting, For the first time, we'd allow under Georgia law for poll workers to be from adjoining counties. We saw, I believe, a shortage of poll workers, particularly during the pandemic, and this would begin to address that issue. The House bill requires reports on wait times and changes to precincts if wait times are more than 1 hour at any given point during a general election. It allows the poll superintendent then discretion to split the precinct, bring in more poll workers, or bring in more machines, whatever is needed to make those lines move faster in the very large polling places. It also ensures that the location of voting precincts are set prior to the election, not moving from one place to.
Joining us this afternoon. We're now ready to consider House Bill 531. This will be hearing only as well. Sounds like there's an echo.
Isn't it true it's a good thing to have these minutes recorded?
The gentleman knows of what he speaks. We apologize.
Oh, no problem,
Mr.
no
Chairman.
problem. It's going to happen to my phone in a minute, I assure you. But,
Please continue.
this is one of the problems of modern technology, and in my case, the user usually. It also sets more uniform voting times for advanced voting across the state. It prohibits changes to advanced voting locations within 14 days of a regular election. We saw this problem before the last election. We do have rules that talk about how soon or close to the election you can change a precinct. This would now apply some guidelines to early voting precincts so they're not moved around, thus possibly confusing some of our voters. The bill also protects the sanctity of the voting area by prohibiting the offering of anything of value within the 150 traditional feet that we have set as a place where you go to vote but not go to have other things happen to you or given to you. And it also encourages voting in the correct precinct so that an elector's vote will count for all the races on the ballot, particularly the down ballot races. Mr. Chairman, it also addresses the testing of our voting equipment and prepares the way for better oversight and auditing of the elections. It does this in a couple of ways. It requires greater public notice to the testing of voting machines prior to elections and makes sure that everybody understands that this is something that the public can view, this testing of the voting machines. It also returns us to a timeline for certification the Monday after the election to allow for better auditing of the results. That used to be the deadline for certification for your counties, the Monday after the election. We saw, I think, in this last election that the audit processes that we began to set in place before the election played a good role in the election process. This moving of the certification date back to the traditional Monday after the election will help also have more time for future and better auditing of the balloting process. It also requires new security paper for ballots that includes the features to authenticate the ballots themselves. For the first time, this bill would require the training of poll watchers and also ensures the ability of poll watchers to observe the tabulating centers and processes that go on during the election. It would also create for the first time a bipartisan ballot duplication panel for any ballots that need to be duplicated. That is already in place for our adjudication panels when it comes to elections. The bill also improves the timing of our election process. It shortens our runoff back to the traditional 4-week period that we had prior to a few years ago when we went to a very long 9-week period. Some people refer to this as the give us back our Christmas provision. In other words, I don't suspect many of us enjoyed seeing ads after ads after ads, particularly over Christmas time, and this would put us back to a 4-week runoff period by providing a partial ranked choice voting system, which is for our overseas voters, which is currently used by some of our neighboring states. As I understand it, other states that have runoff primaries, I'm pretty sure Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina implement that form so that they don't have a 9-week runoff. The bill also begins to eliminate what is commonly referred to as jungle primaries. I heard stories, and you may have too, during this past election. Everybody knew that we had 2 U.S. senators up for election and that you could vote for 2 of them. Well, many people, or some people, unfortunately, exercised that in the list of 19 people that were running in the so-called jungle primary for the last Senate election. This begins to get rid of that process with all but 2 exceptions, and those are seats which could not be filled by appointment, thus being held open for a longer period of time, those in the General Assembly and those in the United States Congress. Mr. Chairman, the bill addresses the roles and actions of our election officials as well. It allows the General Assembly to select the chairman of the State Board of Elections, such that the quasi-legislative role of rulemaking is separated from the officer charged with the enforcement or the executive side of the voting rules that are put into place. It requires advance notice for adoption of any emergency rules by the State Elections Board to the General Assembly and strict adherence to the Georgia Code for any such new rules that are adopted. It also provides that public funding be used for the administration of our elections. Further, it ensures the availability for sufficient early voting locations by providing for the use of government buildings similar to the way that day of voting precincts can be utilized by our county election officials. Mr. Chairman, that is an overview of House Bill 531. It's a bill designed, once again, to ease the administration of our election officials, and it is meant to be an effort to begin to restore confidence of our voters in our voting process. And I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chairman Fleming. Members of the committee, questions? Senator Gooch.
One question, kind of simple. I probably got more questions about this back home, and it seemed like a reasonable question. On section 21, Representative Fleming, lines 1269 through 71, prohibits the giving of gifts or money, which is pretty obvious, including but not limited to food and drink. So are we saying we're not allowed to pass out bottled water if there's 200 people in line to vote?
You can pass out bottled water, but once they get within that 150 feet, you cannot. You can, as always, approach the people that are coming to vote, whether it be when they get there or walking to that area. But once you get within that area of 150 feet that we have always outlined, you'd have to do anything you wanted to do with them before they got there.
So is that somewhere else in the law now that's prohibited?
So explain your question.
So, okay, let me give you an example. In Dahlonega, every precinct in Lumpkin County is at the Park and Rec building. So you walk into the building, there's restrooms, there's water fountains, but if someone had a bottle of water they were handing out to people outside the line on a hot summer day, you would say we would prohibit that?
No, you just can't do it within the 150 feet of the precinct. Well, there's always been 150 feet around the voting precinct where you were not to approach voters for most reasons. This would now bring giving away things within that rule.
Okay, so they could walk out to the 150-foot ring and drink the water.
Or they could bring it with themselves, or they could walk, whether they got into the 150-foot range,
Right.
They could have it with them.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Everyone is intently reading the material. Senator Harrell.
Yes, so the stated reason.
If you'd use your mic, please,
Oh,
Senator.
yes, I'm sorry, forgot. So the stated reason for bringing forward this bill is to increase confidence in the integrity of election, correct?
I think it will help, yes.
Yes, okay. So the limitation on weekend voting, how does that relate to the objective?
Our current law allows for only one Saturday of voting, but because the statute is not worded probably as tightly as the intent was, that has been stretched beyond the code to allow for any time, anywhere, basically, when it comes in that early voting. So what this bill does is it acknowledges the traditional one Saturday of voting we have, which is what most people refer to as a second Saturday. And then for the first time in our code, it will actually add Sunday voting. And it gives the counties an option on that first weekend. They can choose either Saturday or Sunday.
So, in the last election, there were more than 100,000 voters who took advantage of that weekend voting, and those were disproportionately black people. So what do you have to say to the loss of those voting options, particularly for people of color?
You are incorrect in your facts, Senator.
Okay.
The majority of people that voted on the weekend were not people of color.
Okay, so do you
They
have
were
that
very,
data?
it was actually very close to the same percentage of the voting population in the mid-30s.
Okay, well, let's talk about all people then. How does taking away so many weekend hours, particularly from working people, how does that help?
Actually, this will add many more weekend hours than we've ever had before across the state. If you do an analysis around the state, you will find, because the current law says that they are to be open only on that Saturday on their normal business hours, that can vary from just a couple hours to maybe more in some locations. So there are most of the counties in the state which do not have as many voting hours as will be added here. The factor of voting hours on the weekends for early voting that will be added will be exponential with this bill, because we're actually requiring for the first time in law more hours for early voting.
Where are you from?
From a little town outside of Augusta.
Do you think it's possible that the needs of a larger, I'm from Dekalb County, that the needs of a large county are different than a small county, and therefore you should keep some local control over those hours? I mean, like Dekalb County has challenges with traffic and probably more people who have jobs where they do need to vote on the weekend. I can tell you we need those hours in order to reduce the long lines
So with most
during
things,
the other hours.
I'm sorry, Senator. I didn't
Yeah,
mean to
no,
interrupt.
that's okay.
No, so with most things, we're trying to have a balanced approach here. This would actually set longer hours for weekend voting than exist in probably many counties now. And we do account for some flexibility for larger counties who have a traffic issue, like you said. It mandates for the first time that when you do early voting, that it be at least 9 to 5, but it can be the same amount of time the polls are normally open, that being 7 to 7. So that is a choice by the local area.
So they can still do 7 to 7?
They absolutely can, yes.
Thank you, Senator. We'll be happy to come back in a few minutes. You've got some colleagues who have points
Sure.
they'd like to address. Senator from Augusta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. It's a two-part question. On page 3, on section 1, just trying to understand, just trying to get the rationale about us, the General Assembly, electing the chairperson of the State Election Board. And then along those same lines, on page 4, line 78, just trying to get clarification. Could that person participate in a political organization? Because it says they can't participate in a political party organization, but could they still participate in a political organization? So number one, why would we be electing the chairperson, the thought process behind that? And then number two, even though they can't do a political party organization, could they participate in a political organization?
So my suspicion is the answer to your first question could be yes. Excuse me, your second question could be yes. In answer to your first question, this is a model which is not unheard of. We're not creating a new wheel here. The one that was focused on for the House bill that created this new model, which many bills were incorporated to give you the bill in front of you now, is based on the state of Kentucky. In Kentucky there, the legislature does elect the chairperson of the State Board of Elections, and this would bring us in a model similar to that. The other members of the State Board of Election would not change. One House member, one person appointed by the House, one by the Senate, one by each of the two major political parties. The Secretary of State would still be an ex officio, non-voting member, and be a part of the board, and of course would still be the executive branch of government in this example that we're talking about, which would carry out the laws, but in this case the regulations passed by the quasi-legislative function of the State Board of Elections.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the minority leader for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a couple of questions. One is leading off of Senator Jones. Where does this person come from that's going to be nominated and elected by the General Assembly? Who is responsible for choosing this person or persons? Do they come from a pool of people, or where do they come from?
The House and the Senate.
Excuse me?
The House and the Senate. We get to choose the legislature
But where do you choose them from?
from anybody available who could do the job.
Is there some notice put out that this is available?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
you can,
Madam Leader, I think I see where your question's going. This is taken after a process which is already in the code. If you look at OCGA 50-6-1, that is how the legislature can elect the state auditor. That process
Is that
has
in the
been there
bill?
for decades, and this is simply taking that same procedure and putting it into this position of electing the chairman of the State Board of Elections.
is that in the law? Is that in this bill, where
Uh,
this person is coming from?
It will come from the same place every other nominee that the House and Senate fills for any board, including the current State of Election Board. The State of Election Board is filled not only by a member from each party, but also people who are nominees of the House and Senate. So the same people that can currently fill those two positions in the State Board of Election are also in the current pool of people who could fill the new chairman of the board.
Okay, in section, let's see, where is it? Things are moved around, so I'm having a little trouble finding.
If you can give me the subject matter, I might be able to help you, Madam Leader.
It's concerning funding. Why would the General Assembly take away the rights of a local superintendent to accept grants and other funds to help defray the cost of running these offices?
So
What is the purpose of that?
The purpose of that is that the administration of our election should be funded by public dollars.
And do we do
Or
that?
at least should be administered by a body which appropriates funds.
You saying it should be, but do we provide funding for our counties to?
The administration of
Runoff.
elections in the state of Georgia always has been and would continue to be after this bill a joint venture between the state and the local governments.
I think the longer you talk, the lower you talk. I don't know if that's on purpose or.
You can't hear me, is that your point? I apologize, I'll try to speak more directly into the mic.
Mr. Chairman, you can come back to me.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Madam Leader. We'll move to the Dean of the Senate, Senator Harbison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Fleming, I thought I wrote the note down when you mentioned the fact that there was a general interpretation that you made about early voting, and that was ideally supposed to be Saturday, but we done it on Saturday and Sunday, just in a general sense, and you opted to go back to the Saturday only kind of thing. And the reason I bring that up is because in a conversation with our elections chief in Muskogee County, one of the things that she mentioned specifically, one, is that please do not restrict weekend voting. Please, because it creates a logjam, a real problem for us when we're trying to carry out our job in a timely manner, given all the other restrictions and hurdles we have to meet, that kind of thing. So I'm just sort of wondering, why do we reset back to the one day as opposed to both of those days, and then have a follow-up?
We don't, therefore the premise of your question is incorrect. This actually, if you look in the Georgia Code now, there's only one day of early voting, and that's on the second Saturday. For the first time, this bill would put into the code another day of early voting, and that could be a Saturday or a Sunday on the first weekend. That would be the choice of your local election official, which one they wanted to do that. We know that most counties in the state do not have and have never had Sunday voting. There are some, usually in more metropolitan areas, that have had some. So this bill would still give them the choice to do that if they so were to choose. Early on in your question, I think you were alluding to my comment about the fact that because the code section, which is currently written, that only talks about having one day of Saturday voting, the way it was written, it basically says shall have that day, but it doesn't say can't have other days, and therefore the intent of it was interpreted to be broader than that.
All right, thank you. And want to follow up from that same source.
Yes, sir.
Do we deal at all with driver's license signups for voting when we do that process? Because they were very passionate about that as well, because it just really creates a great atmosphere for them to work within and anticipate how many people are going to be turning out to the polls.
So I agree with you that using driver's license is the proper way to go about absentee balloting. And yes, this bill does move us from a method of applying for your absentee ballot to a number that 97% of Georgians have, and that is a driver's license number or a driver services number. Some people can call it that. And we will now use that for our purposes of getting and verifying the absentee ballot and the application and the person who is applying.
If I misspoke, I meant when the young person signs up to get their driver's license, will they be registered to vote at the same time?
This bill does not affect that area of the law.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I apologize. I misunderstood you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I was listening to Senator Jones' question, and I know that we can with the Secretary of State as the chair, but why are we? When you said the
Sure.
Kentucky model, listed some examples of other states that do it a different way. Why are we changing?
Well, first of all, I've never been opposed to the legislature playing a more active role in the appointments that we have in the state. I guess that would be one advantage, in my opinion, of what has been referred to as a Kentucky model over our current model. Also, just as we as a legislative branch normally do not carry out executive branch functions, it's a little different with the State Board of Elections. They are not purely a legislative branch, but they are a quasi-legislative branch in the sense that they have rule-making authority. And usually, not in all, but many setups we have in our form of government is that the legislative area is the people who make rules and regulations, in our case statutes, and the executive branch is the one in charge of carrying them out. And this would put a little bit of separation between the executive branch functions and the quasi-legislative branch functions, which are those of the State Board of Elections.
Okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate all your hard work on this and your committee. I know y'all been at this for a long time, and I thought my good friend, the Dean of the Senate, was going to get to this in his question. But am I reading in Section 19 correctly that y'all are eliminating probably one of the most chaotic portions of our recent election by eliminating the signatures that currently are used and replacing that with either a driver's license, state identification card, or the last 4 digits of the elector's social security number and date of birth in order to confirm that we are that the individuals filling out the ballot are who they say they are, along with the signed affidavit?
I think the general answer to your question is yes. This portion of, I think the portion of the House bill that you're referring to is very similar to bills that y'all passed over to us. And there's always two things, and even early on I found myself saying them interchangeably. There is the return of the absentee ballot itself, and there is the return of the absentee ballot application. And so what we do in the absentee ballot application process is that you will now be using to verify who you are a very unique number that most of us actually don't even know because we never use it, which helps make it unique. That is your driver's license number. And when you send in your absentee ballot, you will also once again put your driver's license number on there, and that's going to take in about 97% of the Georgians who vote. And you mentioned some of the exceptions in there for people who don't have that number.
Right. And for what reason would it be on the application?
So on the application,
On the last four of the elector's social security number?
that would actually be on the absentee ballot itself.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
Yeah, if you don't have that driver's license number.
Excellent. Thank you.
Question for the majority leader. Senator Butler.
Okay, I just want to come back to the same question I asked you before.
Yes,
about
ma'am.
taking away the funding so that these elections can be run without problems. Does that have a fiscal impact on the office's budget? I mean, where is that money that they have been receiving from groups that could help them with the election?
Well, I suspect we all believe, because it's happened twice now in about a century, we'll probably have a pandemic one day again.
We'll probably have what?
We'll probably have a pandemic one day again. I hope it's no time soon. But that is where you saw a lot of this money flowing into our election system. It is quite actually a problem that we had never had before. So what we're doing here is to say that the money will flow from public dollars for the administration of public elections. And that's what the bill calls for.
I'm hard pressed to believe that we've never accepted funds before the pandemic for helping with elections.
You would be hard pressed to find the amount that came in. My suspicion is somewhere, sometime, somewhere, somebody may have done something. But just like we learned a lot of things from the pandemic, that is one thing that we had never seen before.
That is true, but does that have an impact on their budgets? When they have to come out the budget
Yes,
to
ma'am.
do some of the things that
My suspicion
they
is
will have to do.
My suspicion is every budget for a board of elections, or in some counties, the probate judge who still run elections, is probably going to see a slight increase in the future because of a lot of the things we learned in this past election. There are probably going to be more things to be done. So my suspicion is the appropriations process will probably bring more dollars, not less, if you look at all the 159 counties across the state.
Senator Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to address Section 22, which has to do with provisional ballots, but these other questions have left me with one minor thing I want to cover in the early voting hours. Isn't it true that the current code sets a minimum number of hours, but that local communities can add to that? So what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to cap the number of hours, so it's not really that you're being more generous with the hours because you're setting caps, isn't?
You're talking about the current code, Senator, and you're
Yeah, the
incorrect.
current
You're
code
incorrect again.
is
The
a
current
minimum
code does not
number of
mention
hours.
anything about Sunday voting or anything other than the one Saturday. For the first
But
time,
it sets the minimum.
for the first time, this bill actually puts into place mandatory hours, which we believe or know is going to greatly increase the amount of weekend voting allowed in the state of Georgia going forward. The reference now is business hours, and that varies from many places across the state just for that one Saturday. So what you have here for the first time is actually a mandatory of 2 weekend days of votings, and it has to be at least 9 to 5 and can be 7 to 7. And once again, when you add up all those hours across the state, you just had a tremendous increase in early voting hours across the state.
I guess we're just going to have to see that differently. The way I see it is the current code has a minimum number of hours, and what you're doing is setting a cap, which is actually going to result in fewer hours for large segments of the state.
Show
But
me the
we'll
place in
move-
the bill that you're reading that, Senator.
I really would like to move into section
I think you
22.
can't show me because it's not in the bill what you're saying, but go ahead.
Okay, I would like to move into section 22 that has to do with provisional ballots.
Yes, ma'am.
This is a common problem. I think we had like 10,000 provisional ballots recently. It happens all the time that people just show up at the wrong precinct. It's a confusing aspect of elections. I know in my home state, you can go to any precinct in your county. So that kind of takes care of that situation. These new machines that we have the technology so that if you show up at the wrong precinct, they can pull up your ballot on the machine for the correct precinct and allow you to vote, so you don't have that situation where you have to drop down ballot races because you were voting in the wrong precinct. So it seems to me like you could allow that to occur, use the machines that we have, and then drop that ballot into a provisional ballot envelope and deal with that. So given that it seems like there's such a simple solution to these provisional ballots, why would you want to just throw out those 10,000 or so ballots of people who have actually made the effort to go out and vote?
Well, your example of not changing Georgia law currently is throwing out thousands of votes, and people are being disenfranchised because we have a precinct by precinct system. And you go to your precinct to vote, and as you will see in other places in the bill, we actually require a certain amount of voting machines based upon an anticipation of this many people can vote at this precinct. So when you encourage out of precinct voting, you're actually throwing potential chaos into the system and encouraging thousands of people potentially to show up at a precinct that is not designed nor manned to handle that onslaught of voting. Given the fact that we have a precinct by precinct system, here's what is happening. In 2016 election, you had probably somewhere from 200 to 300 people that actually voted a provisional ballot out of precinct. You fast forward to the 2020 election, and now you're up into the 20,000s. So when you go into and demand a provisional ballot, not in your precinct, you may get to vote for the top of the ticket, but the things down ballot, your ballot is your vote is not counted because you have to be in your precinct, because you can't vote for your senator, you can't vote for your commissioner, you can't vote for your representative, maybe your school board, whatever is in the down ballot races. So in the current model, we're actually having people encouraged not to go to their precinct and vote. We're having thousands and thousands of votes which are being disqualified because you have to be in your precinct to vote for those people. So by going to the elimination of out-of-precinct voting, we're actually doing what we used to do that worked quite well, that is encouraging people to go to their precincts to vote and having all their votes count, not just some of them.
Well, I really don't think people show up at the wrong precinct on purpose, and I don't think that we're encouraging it. But I'm also
you're incorrect,
saying,
and I can explain to you why you're incorrect. There is an effort underway that when the poll workers, Bob shows up to vote, he goes in, they say, you're at the wrong precinct. You need to be, several blocks over here at such and such gymnasium. Bob walks out without his I voted sticker. There are people there that turn them back around and say, you go in and you demand a provisional ballot so you can vote here. They're not telling you the truth. Well, that's only half the truth they're being told when they're sent back in. What they're not being told is that, all those local races, your vote's not going to count. And so my goal is to make people's votes count and get them to the right precinct, rather than going down a path. Like I said, in 2016 it was 200 or 300. In 2020 it was 20,000. We don't need to have people's vote in Georgia not counted, and the method that you're advocating would actually do that.
well, but what I'm saying is the machines that we have, if somebody shows up at the wrong precinct, the election worker can bring up the correct ballot on the machine so you don't lose those votes in the down ballot races.
And let's just
That's
assume
simple.
for the sake of your question, you're correct on that. What you can't do, though, is have enough machines to do that if you have several more hundred people show up at a precinct that are registered to vote there, because we have a precinct by precinct election process on election day.
But 10 to 20,000 ballots for a whole state out of how many
Well,
millions?
you may not think 10 to 20,000 people not being able to vote in the down ballot races is not
No,
important, but I do think it is important, and I
No,
want
I'm
to
saying
encourage
they
that to
can
happen.
vote in the down ballot races, and that it's not going to
under our
cause
system of
long
precincts, they
lines.
could not, Senator.
It's not going to cause long lines because it's 10 to 20,000 people out of 2.5 million.
I disagree with you. If you encourage out-of-precinct voting, you will have a further disruption, as we have begun to see, of where people show up and where they're supposed to show up.
I think that that the pandemic caused a lot of precincts to have to close because a lot of them were in churches. We also have redistricting coming up, which is going to change precincts. So it's just a situation of, from my experience, and I work with the elections in my local area a lot, and I have volunteers who work there, and they give me feedback. People just get confused.
And I'm sure that does happen sometime, but if you send the message, don't go to your precinct to vote, there'll be even more confusion.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the minority leader for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Madam
I
Leader.
want to ask you a couple of questions on drop boxes.
Yes, ma'am.
Was there some reason for moving the drop boxes from the outside to the inside? And my other question is, well, I guess I asked it from the
So
beginning. Is there some example that you can
Yes,
show that the drop box on the outside
Yeah, there are a
is
couple.
not as
there are
good
a
as the
couple.
inside?
Yes, ma'am. There are a couple of things that we found. Number one, this idea of a drop box not being monitored and manned, so to speak, I don't think is a good thing for our confidence in our election process. There were drop boxes in this country that were intentionally set on fire and destroyed. And
But
the
did that
law-
happen in Georgia?
Can I finish? And no, it did not. In answer to your question, it happened in another state. But do things that happen in other states eventually get here? They absolutely do. So this whole thought process of an unmanned box out there somewhere that has no hours, that doesn't have rules about when you can put things in it, when you can't, like we do in other voting processes, is probably heading down the wrong path. The idea of bringing them into early voting precincts is they would be open the same time as the early voting precinct, let's say maybe in this area from 7 to 7, that they are now going to be mandated that they be emptied at the end of the day and that they be monitored by a person. I spoke with a person who went to one of these drop boxes, and there were problems with them like there were many things in the pandemic. We learned a lot, and we had to learn a lot. This person said when they got there, the drop box was literally running over. He could have reached in and grabbed 100 ballots if he'd been a nefarious person and taken them out. But instead, he said he tried to push his in as far as he could so the next person that came by maybe not be able to get his ballot. So the idea that we don't have drop boxes in the Georgia Code now, it has never been allowed by an act of the legislature, but for the first time that we would. In fact, House Bill 531 requires that all counties now have a drop box, where there were dozens that did not previously. We think is a move in the right direction rather than the wrong.
So just to put them inside and not have them monitored, that was one example of one box that might have been running over with ballots because so many people were voting. So that causes you to want to put them inside and not have someone just check the box throughout the day to make sure that it's not running over with ballots.
Actually, putting them inside allows a person to be there all day long to monitor them, because this bill puts them in the early voting precinct, so you would always have a poll worker there to make sure that problem never existed.
Same thing could happen for the outside. A person could go out and check the box. As a matter of fact, ballot boxes work better than the U.S. mail boxes. And they're not manned, they're every day, year round.
I'm not going to start criticizing the U.S. mail.
Well,
I'll let you
I'm
do
not
that if you want
criticizing
to.
them either, I'm just telling the truth.
Okay.
Okay. So drop boxes work well. I think they should still be on the outside. Obviously, I would think
ma'am.
that they should be on the outside.
Well, then you'll probably be in favor of the fact that this bill requires drop boxes in all counties now, where there were none in dozens of counties previously.
But they're inside.
But they are inside where they're monitored by a poll worker. Yes, ma'am, you're correct.
Is that a extra funded position or?
Well, if you have it inside the early voting precinct with this, which this advocates, you would have people there already.
I know the first bill, first or second bill, I'm not sure which one.
Yes, ma'am.
Now suggested a security officer could man the drop boxes?
I'll-
Is that still in this bill?
Well, it would be someone authorized to be there working at the polls. I suspect that a security officer could be deputized by the superintendent to carry out that function. Yes, ma'am.
It's just an added responsibility for that, whomever that
Well, I
may
think
be.
it's worth it. I think securing those absentee votes is worth some added responsibility.
Thank you, Madam Leader. Other questions from the committee? Senator Harrell.
Thank you. I'd like to now refer to section 27 that has to do with runoff dates.
Yes, ma'am.
The Senate research statement about this says that the current law provides different methods of determining a runoff date for different types of races, but that you're striking that language and saying any runoff must be held within 28 days of the preceding election. Have you gotten feedback from election supervisors as to whether they think they can meet that date? There's a lot that has to happen in between.
Not only have we gotten input from election supervisors, but we've looked at the history of Georgia, and we managed to have elections for years with it being 4-week runoffs.
Do you think the new voting system that we have might generate more work that might make that difficult? Because that's a recent change.
No, ma'am.
And how did you obtain your feedback from election supervisors?
We had probably somewhere between a dozen and a half a dozen, forgive me, there's been so many hearings, testify live at our hearings. We had many more input, written comments, and further, we had separate committee members reach out to their own elections director, as I did several of mine. So probably the touches to election directors with this have been probably well over 100.
And they all said they love it. They really want.
They all like parts of it, and then there are parts they don't like, particularly some versions. Well, we discussed so many bills. When we give them more responsibility and more oversight, sometimes there's resistance. When you give them more flexibility, they seem to very much like that. And the bill is a balance in between those two, I believe.
And did you receive feedback from large counties like the one I'm from?
Yes,
It
ma'am.
always takes them longer to do things just because the sheer volume.
Yes, ma'am, I believe we did.
You received feedback from DeKalb County specifically?
DeKalb, I'm not positive about. I have to search my memory breaks. I know that y'all had an elections director that retired not too long ago, and I know that previous one I spoke to several times, and I'm trying to figure which election bill it was about. I'm not positive, I'm sorry.
I don't think we've had a change, so maybe you're confusing it with another county.
There was a lady who had been there for a long time, and she was great, and I had several conversations with her, and it could have been in years past.
Yeah, several years past.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. Other questions? I'd like to pose just a point of clarification.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Fleming.
Chairman.
Looking at section 25 on the duplication panel,
Yes.
can you explain how this was done in the past if there was an issue with a ballot and it needed duplication?
So section 25 refers to bipartisan duplication panels. And what that means is a representative from each of the major parties there along with an election worker. In the past, I believe it could have been observed by election boards, but the panel would have been just election workers, as I understand it.
So there was not a bipartisan participation in the duplication panel?
Not directly as this bill would lay it out now, and I'm careful in answering that because, as you know, most of your boards of elections actually do have bipartisan party members on it, and they have the ability to oversight and participate in a lot of things.
Very good. Does the duplication panel in any way deal with military ballots?
I suspect if the military ballot came back in a form that it needed to be duplicated, which many do because of the type of voting that we get back from them. So yes, I believe it would affect that.
Thank you. So we'd use the same duplication panel approach to addressing questions about military ballots that we would do about other ballots, normal ballots.
I believe that's correct. Those military ballots are a very, very narrow area, although very important in my mind, and they are treated differently in a lot of ways. I do know that you sometimes do have to have duplication of those ballots so they can be scanned. So my suspicion would be yes. Usually it's provisional ballots that are filled out improperly. Sometimes they vote for more than one person.
Right.
So you have to scratch that and take the other ones where it does work.
And in the primary, we had, the jungle primaries, you referred to it in November, we had a number of ballots that needed adjudication and resolution because of misinformation and confusion.
There seems to be a good bit of that, yes, sir.
And again, I'm happy to know that military ballots will go through this same approach toward duplication.
And I believe that's correct, and I'll give you the qualification that there are so many idiosyncrasies with those ballots that I always speak with some trepidation about exactly how you handle different parts of it.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the minority leader for a question.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm just kind of stuck on funding for election offices. Can we agree that policing is a public government function?
Sometimes it's carried out by some private security guards.
Does the fact that you are advocating for public functions like voting to be funded only with taxpayer dollars mean that you support banning all third-party and private funding for police departments?
Usually most people that we give the arrest power to are public in some nature, but not always.
So do you believe that you support banning all third-party and public funding for
In what
police
area,
departments?
Madam Leader? In what area, Madam Leader? I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
You understand.
Read it to me one more time.
Okay. I started out by asking you
Yes,
if you
ma'am.
agree that policing is a public government function.
And I said in most instances it is. Yes, ma'am.
So we do agree on a little something.
I hope so.
I'm trying to get you to agree with me on something, but we just can't find that medium.
Well, I have to be careful, Madam Leader.
I'm not gonna guide you wrong.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
So does that fact that you are advocating for public function like voting to be funded only by the taxpayer money mean that you support banning all third-party and private funding for police departments?
So do I want to do away with the Police Benevolent Association? No, ma'am. I think it's a good organization that helps folks. I myself contribute to it. But it is separate. It is separate in that fashion from the actual policing function. And what we're talking about here is not banning all private gifts to any local governments or state government. What we're talking about is specifically the public administration of public elections. And there's a difference there.
And using taxpayer dollars for that?
Yes, ma'am.
Chair recognizes.
I do have a lot of questions, but I guess
We'll come back around, Madam Leader.
Okay.
You have plenty of opportunity. Chair recognizes Senator Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Fleming, good to see you again.
Yes, sir. Mr.
We've
Chairman.
worked together in this Ethics Committee for years, haven't we?
Yes, sir.
The third-party funding that we've been discussing the last few minutes, do you know any details about that? I'm just curious. I mean, I don't recall any of the counties in Southwest Georgia getting any funding from anybody.
And you would probably find that to be generally the case. There were counties outside the metro area that received some funding, as I understand it. The amounts were usually much greater in the metro area from the experience that I have with trying to look into it. And you are right. Generally, if you were a smaller rural area, you probably didn't see any dollars or very little.
Thank you.
Senator Harrell.
Okay,
All right.
I'm on a roll.
Right, we're moving along here. We'll give you a breather, and then we let you come back.
Yeah, there we go. There we
you
go. Okay, so, one thing that Democrats are sometimes accused of is passing laws that take fun things away from people or convenient things like this. I mean, this is really convenient.
I have
right?
new accused you of that, Senator.
Well, I've been accused of that, okay.
Well,
or
it wasn't by
other-
me. Let's just be clear.
So I just wanted to warn you, you're about to do that.
Okay. Accuse you of passing a law that would take something away from somebody?
No.
Okay.
You're about to ban something that people really enjoy, and it doesn't go over too well. So, I'm referring to Section 24
Yes,
that
ma'am.
has to do with what we call line warming,
Yes,
which
ma'am.
is handing out water and snacks to people who are waiting in line for a long time.
When you say we, you mean you've participated in that?
I haven't, but a lot of my constituents do.
Have they ever come to my county and done that?
Tell me where you live again?
Columbia County, it's the suburbs of Augusta.
Well, we'll have to send some people there.
Wonder
It's
why they
fun.
only come to your county and not mine.
Well, because it's where they live.
Oh, okay.
It would be a long drive to go to the Augusta.
Well, but would it be
area.
worth it?
But
if
if
they,
you
but
want
would it be
them-
worth it if they did?
Yeah, well, if you would like them to come, I bet they
Okay.
would be thrilled, because
Okay.
these are people who, they just love voting.
I would, if you would bring some of those food truck, I got the precincts in my district, I would let you set them up, and I would ask you to give it to them outside the 150-foot area, but I would still want you to feed them like you do some of the people in your county.
Okay, well, that would be fine, except I've never seen them use a food truck.
Oh, you haven't been looking very hard.
Okay, well, maybe I live in the poorer end of the county.
I doubt it, but go ahead.
But anyway, okay, so yeah, my constituents really love this activity. They love voting. They want to make it fun. Now, we did make a mistake one time. There was a candidate who decided to go hand out pizza.
Yes, ma'am.
And it turns out that's wrong, okay? So we learned, because he's a candidate. We learned that lesson. But these are just volunteers
Right.
who want to take care of people. Why would you ban that?
I'm not, and I would encourage them not only to
No,
come
no,
to my. Hold on,
they
hold on.
can't
Let
get-
me finish. You asked a question. Please let me finish.
Okay,
I'm
all
not
right.
banning that,
Okay.
and I would encourage them, in all seriousness, to come to my county. I can tell you where to go, but they can still do all that as long as they do it outside of 150 feet.
But then they would have to leave their place in line.
No, they wouldn't.
Yeah, they would.
You can give it to them before they get there. We
No,
have
no,
always
no,
had
no,
this
no.
one little area. Let me ask you this: should they be able to give it to them at the voting machine?
Inside the building?
Yeah, why not? Oh,
Yeah,
it's
that-
different. We're drawing a line somewhere. And that's the whole point of this.
It would be too
You
late
have to
inside the
draw the
building.
line somewhere. We've always drawn it at 150 feet, and that's all this bill does.
The 150 feet is for like campaigning. This is
Oh,
not
okay.
campaigning.
Oh, not at all, I'm sure.
No, it's not. It's,
Okay,
it's
all right.
truly not
Okay.
campaigning.
They
There's
just
no
don't come to my
logos.
district and my precincts
I
and do
will
it.
send them.
Okay, oh, now we got a deal.
Okay. Now we're working together.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. And I appreciate the banter, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Senator Robertson for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the bantering too. To cover a few things that you've discussed, I've heard you ask the question about resources and comparing bigger counties and smaller counties. Did you find through meeting with the election supervisors in the counties that there's an allocation process used by the state to determine how many voting machines or ballot reading machines that each county gets?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There is a process there, and the bill specifically, if I may, goes to one of those processes. If you will, one of my counties today back home is having an splost vote, and the election directors will promise you that vote turnout will be incredibly small by comparison. So one of the things the election directors ask us to do, which is in this bill, we do mandate always on general elections that there be a certain number of machines per voter. However, this bill for the first time would allow outside the general elections those superintendents to have some leadway in that, because they will explain to you it takes a lot of manpower and hours to unpack 15 machines, test them all, and then pack them back up and store them properly again when you knew you were going to need 5.
Yeah. Would a number, after talking to them, would I be correct in saying that in each county, in our 159 counties, that each county is allocated one ballot reading device for 250 voters?
I would have to double check on that number. I know there is a formula there, though, Senator. I apologize, I can't tell off the top of my head.
It's no problem. I'm proud to represent what I believe, and I think my colleague, the Dean of the Senate, would agree with me that I probably have if not the best, the second best elections director in the state of Georgia, in Muskogee County, a tiny city of only 200,000 people at night. But and
She does have a good reputation, yes, sir.
yeah, she does an excellent job. Amazingly, our polls tend to close fairly on time. The lines move really well, And we do have volunteer groups that give out water outside of the 150 feet where politicking is not allowed or campaigning is not allowed. And they do not give out the water to gain votes, but they give out the water as a public safety measure. And all of our polls are monitored by the Muskogee County Sheriff's Office, who carries that responsibility to make sure the polls are safe and the voters there are protected, those in line wanting to. Now, there was a discussion on the provisional ballots earlier, and are you aware of the fact that nowhere in Georgia law does it currently allow for a provisional ballot to be filled out on a ballot marking device in the wrong precinct? That I'll stop at that point, then I'll have a follow-up.
So Senator, as I understand the provisional balloting process, it is different than those ballots which flow through the machines. So you probably would not, under our current system, have a provisional ballot, as I understand it, that would actually go through the machine. It would be hand-filled out.
Exactly, and that was my concern.
Yes, sir.
when I heard earlier that provisional ballots, they could be allowed, and I think your response was if they did that, they would lose all their votes on the lower part of the ballot.
So yes, sir. When you under current law, because we allow out of precinct voting, what happens is that you would have got to vote for the top of the ticket, but your down ballot races would very much probably not count.
And the reason they require the hand filling out of the ballots is their fear that if a ballot is filled out on a ballot marking device and then placed into the scanner, then
You would lose it.
you would lose that ballot.
Yes, sir. It
correct?
has to be separated. The provisional ballot is by its nature a ballot with something that else is going on besides the normal process. And sometimes it is a person who, for whatever reason, was not registered. Sometimes it is a person who, for whatever reason, they might have been registered, but it didn't show up for some glitch in the system. So the provisional ballot is made there for the just-in-case circumstances. And the more you have, and election directors will tell you this, it causes a lot of extra time, effort, and work for them to deal with provisional ballots. They'd much rather have, generally speaking, folks voting in the correct precinct, from what we've heard.
So would you agree that if I was a nefarious person and wanted to interfere with an election, what I would probably do is station myself outside of precincts where there were heavy turnouts, hoping that individuals would show up at the wrong precinct, and when I saw them come out without the peach saying I voted and everything, that I would encourage them to go back inside and demand a provisional ballot as opposed to telling them where they should go, because my intent would be to diminish their ability to vote for the candidates in the mid and lower races on the ballot.
That would certainly be the effect, yes, sir.
And as far as the security, of the drop boxes on the inside, in my experience, especially leading up to elections, the voter registrar's office they have a substantial number of employees that are already on the city budgets, but they also have volunteers that come in. So locating the drop box inside, I think is there a greater opportunity for one of those employees, one of their daily responsibilities possibly be to watch the drop box and to be able to assist any voters that may want to come in and drop some ballots into that box if they need direction or understanding of the process?
I think that certainly would be one of the benefits, yes, sir.
And concerning the cost, do you see a cost difference in having someone inside providing that kind of service or having someone go outside, take themselves out of the office, go out, carry out the same function outside the office? My point being, having it inside in a safer environment does not increase the cost. And if we had somebody designated to go outside and check the box, we would still be spending the same amount of money, but we would be pulling an employee away from the voter registrar's office and possibly putting them in a situation that may not be the best situation for them. Would that be correct?
I think you are correct on that, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Senator. We're about an hour into our discussion. I'm going to recognize the committee for 2 additional questions, and then we'll break, and then we will take time over the next several days to continue to vet this legislation. Chair recognizes the Madam Leader, Minority Leader, for our question.
I just wanted to go back to those offices that might have received funding.
Yes, ma'am.
You said you didn't know of offices that received funding. Did you say that?
No, ma'am. We heard a lot of information about various types of funding.
Say that again?
We heard in the committee process and through investigating this whole area of our government, I guess you would say, a lot about funding.
But you don't know which offices received funding?
No, ma'am. I think some of that is public information and how many counties and how much.
Well, I was just going to give you the information if you didn't have it.
I've heard it before, but I'm happy to listen to you, Madam Leader.
It's about 32 counties that receive outside funding.
I wouldn't
that
disagree
help
with
them through
you.
their
I wouldn't
elections.
disagree with you.
I can read them off to you if you want me to.
That the chairman will allow you to have the
I
time
don't-
you
I
have,
don't know-
but
I know-
I don't disagree
You're
with you.
you're
There may
happy
be-
to provide a list to Chairman Fleming.
There may be other questions.
I do think that if the leader is correct, 32 counties doesn't equal 159. Is that true?
About 120 something short.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the
Does that
gentleman.
mean
Oh, I'm sorry. I was.
Does
Would you
that-
like happy to continue? I'm sorry, Madam Leader.
Did that mean something that there were 120 something short?
Well, I was simply saying
That
that
we
if
have
you're
to
saying there was
stop the funding?
32, I'm sorry. I was simply saying if you were saying there were 32, which I was going to accept your figure, I subtracted that from 159, and that's how I came up with 120 something short. But maybe my math was off a little bit.
But I don't know what the point is of the difference. I mean, if the counties received the funding, they received the funding, and apparently they needed it, and they used it and put it to good use.
I think the point would be that if you're trying to instill confidence in the election system, then you want the public to perceive that the election system is similar, if not the same, as much as it can be in most places. And when you hear sums of millions of dollars being poured into certain areas of the state but not others, I'm not sure that is the best thing for public confidence.
Well, those other counties that didn't get funding had the opportunity to do so. I don't think that they were excluded just because they had the same opportunity as any other county to apply for the funding, and they didn't do it.
I couldn't speak to that, madam.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam Leader. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Augusta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 2 questions. Looking at
Yes, sir.
section 3, page 6. Just on the emergency notification. And so I got a 2-part question. Number 1 is, the emergency notification, of course, exists today. Just asking, why do we believe that that's inadequate now? I think they have to notify the House and the Senate Judiciary when they're going to do an emergency rule. So that's number 1. Why do we believe that's inadequate? But number 2, more specific question is on line 159 on page 7.
Can I answer your first question first?
Yes, go ahead.
I think you're talking about notice after the fact, and this talks
Yeah.
about notice before the fact.
But and that's exact. So on line 159 on page 7, what is a political body? Because I know they register with
159 on
page 7. Yes, line 159 on page 7.
My line 59.
159.
159 says
Page
the
7.
fire. And you looking at LC 280264S?
Yes.
My line 159 says the chief executive officer of each political party or
Right.
body designated pursuant to subsection.
That's what I'm asking. What is body? Because they have to. My understanding is that the political party registers, but also political body registers. I guess that's what we're referencing. So I'm just curious. Like, can you give us an example of that?
Well, it talks about pursuant to 21-2-110. I apologize, I didn't bring my elections code with me. So usually when we reference one code section in another code section, there's a definition there. So my assumption is that your definition would be in 21-2-110.
That's correct. It is. I mean, they have to register. I'm just curious, do we have an example of what a political body, just a name? I know what the political parties would be, who they would be registered. I'm just asking about the body.
I'll try to get you an example.
Okay.
Senator.
Thank you. I appreciate Chairman Fleming. Question? Senator Harrell, you get the last word, Senator Harrell.
All right. This has to do with Section 15, which reduces the amount of time that you can apply for an absentee ballot.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
it does address a situation that I find to be problematic in that there's like really no deadline for making that last request.
Yes, ma'am.
People ask me that all the time. When do I have to do this by? And I'm like, do it now. So I support the concept of having a cutoff day, but yours is, or this bill's is 11 days, which I understand there are some election supervisors who have said that that is excessive. And I was just wondering, would you be willing to compromise and move that to 8 days?
We actually did make changes during that part of the bill, Senator, in the discussions. And as I recall, our Democrat colleagues on the House side, I believe it was, offered some language that they were happy with. In fact, this provision, as I can recall, was addressed in House Bill 270 that we actually voted out of committee. The minority whip on the Democrat side asked us to send that back to committee to make some changes he proposed, and they went to the issue that you're speaking of. And I believe that we did shorten that length of days. We also clarified that even when it came in the Friday before the 2 Fridays before the election, it would be filled by the following Wednesday, so that the likelihood would be that it would get there in time for folks to vote, the processing part of it. So I can remember us making changes in this section. So we've made them before, and I'm open to suggestions that make it better. I guess
So you
that's what I'm
would
trying
at
to
least
say.
consider 8 days
Sure.
instead?
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Fleming. We
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate your
Chairman.
time and
Yes,
your
sir.
hard work on this measure.
Thank you, sir.
We will, I'd like to just, for clarification, we will meet again tomorrow, the 16th of March at 4:45 to continue the discussion on House Bill 531, and at that time we'll accept public input. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to, no? We have to table, first table, then we'll adjourn. Motion to table. Motion. I so moved, and a second from Senator Hatchett. All those in favor? I see no objection. Without objection, now, motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. Second, without objection. Thank you for your time.